Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari from Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, AMU. And today I'll be talking about the concept of justice, one of the important concepts, and its relation with liberty and equality, which has already been discussed in my previous videos. Now, in everyday life, justice is seen as an attribute of law. Whenever we talk about justice, it is the law that we come to understand. But if we think closely, we shall realize that all laws are not always just. In fact, many great political and social movements world over, they have focused upon opposition to unjust laws in a country. Example, the movement against the apartheid in South Africa earlier, and other communities, they held belief that justice is that it is always something impartial. So, justice related with law and justice something impartial. That is a common perception. So, we only need to imagine the statue of goddess of justice who is blindfolded and holds the scale of justice in her hands. Thus, the impartiality and fairness are something which is associated with this concept of justice. Now, in political theories, justice is regarded as a property of distribution. So, whenever we consider justice, it is the distributive aspect of its nature that is being discussed. So, justice can be understood in two meanings. Basically, to give one's due, that is paying one's due, and to set the wrong right, either by compensation or by punishment. Okay, so paying one's due and punishing for wrongdoing or compensating. So, in the first meaning, justice is related to determining the theory of distribution of right or distribution of what rights are and the duties, and security, self-respect, opportunity, etc. I mean, its distribution is what is looked into in society. Now, because distribution of things and services depend upon the historical circumstances of a society, so various concept of justice have been evolved from time to time. It changes, and it changes with economic and social circumstances in a society. In second meaning, the justice is related to the explanation of law. So, when we think about something which is against law or setting things which are wrong as right, we need to see like what are its explanations or interpretations, and what are the rules of punishment. So, that's how it is understood. So, justice is primarily it's a problem of discovering the right course of action. So, whenever we are looking for justice, we are trying to find out what is right or what is wrong. So, here the distinction between right and wrong, that becomes important. So, the term justice implies the equality of or a quality of being just or right or reasonable. So, it opposed to what is unjust, what is wrong, or what is unreasonable. So, it embodies an idea which is similar to the absolute truth. Yet, it's a dynamic idea because of our realization that ideal or our comprehension of what absolute truth is a continuous process, and it keeps on changing from one generation to another. So, our process in this direction, that is evolving process, the continuous process of our society, it depends on the consciousness of the society which it has achieved in that period of time. So, on the basis of consciousness of society, this judgment of right and wrong is made. So, it is necessary that the conception of justice should always be based on reason. But man develops his faculty of reason according to the social consciousness of his age. So, the true meaning of justice should therefore be determined in the light of the prevalent social consciousness, or what D.D. Raphael in his Problem of Political Philosophy in 1976 described as a modern consciousness. So, we do not claim that this should be the perfect idea of justice. The social consciousness is ever-growing phenomena, and we should be prepared to accept new and progressive ideas as far as they are supported by the quality of reason. So, rational ideas which appeals to rationality in whatever generation they are, based on their social consciousness, that idea is the basis of justice. So justice can be understood in two ways if you talk about its meaning. That is to protect a society from the wrong which people they indulge in. So protecting the society from wrong of individuals and punishing those who prohibit such implementation of justice in a society. So law is, second is law, that is also related to the study of philosophical basis. So when we talk about justice, first we say or try to understand it to what are those wrongs which are being committed and what are those laws which are based on justice, which punishes those wrongdoers or those who act against the concept of justice. So word justice itself is originated from the Latin word jus, which means to bind. So the very nature of justice is to bind. So all those criteria or the laws which are made or the judgments which are made or interpretations which are made, it has to be directed towards binding the society. So in this way, justice implies to that social arrangement in which people, they feel are bound or they are bounded with each other in interrelationship. So in simple words, justice is the name of that arrangement in which there is a kind of appropriate arrangement, coordination in personal and social relations, impartiality, selfishness, I beg your pardon, selflessness, and logic. So in which people follow their duties and rights. That is also another benchmark for the concept of justice. Because according to Plato, if we talk justice, according to him, was the right condition of human soul and nature's demand of demand of human nature. Now, Plato, when he gave that definition, that justice is the right condition of a human soul and the demand of human nature, so he tries to establish an ideal society which was based on justice. So he goes to the extent of constructing an ideal state, and that would embody this very definition, because for Plato, justice was one of the four principles of virtue. That is the three other being temperance, wisdom, and courage. So an ideal state that he created on the basis of justice, and the state which embodied justice, where every individual would be true to his nature. That is, as per their skills and natural inclinations, they would be given their place in society. So in a just state, each individual would fulfill his duty diligently. That is what is expected. Now, if you talk about the criteria of justice, because justice has certain criteria, because we understand justice in modern times as the criteria of distribution. So there are three, basically, the criteria, that is the desert, the merit, and the need. So justice is thus more often not linked with distribution. It is in fact a distributive justice itself. So the concept of desert, which has come from the old French word deserter, means to deserve. So it refers to all the actions of men and women that result in special treatment, either in the form of a reward or in the form of punishment. So desert is the return for their action, either in the form of reward or punishment. So it's a suggestion that it is to suggest that the reward or the punishment that a man or a woman receive or is subjected to are a consequence of his or her own efforts or actions. Now, the criteria of merit is the second criteria of justice, and very similar, implying that the meritorious need to be rewarded. Now, this criteria differentiate people on the basis of their merit and validates various rewards of various people in society. So, a person's moral and internal characteristics and capabilities are good to be paid, and they should get their wages on the basis of their contribution in the social welfare. So everyone will get an equal opportunity here to prove his merit, and providing opportunity and giving them that opportunity to explore their skills, and on the basis of that, if they make contribution, so on that merit they need to be given in return. So that is justice. Now, third criteria is that of need. Now, need as a criterion will suggest that people might differ in their capabilities as well as needs. So the principle of justice based on need would argue that irrespective of people's capabilities, their need ought to be fulfilled. But the principal problem of this basis is that there is no clear answer to the question, what is necessary? So in short, no basis of justice is free from problem, whether we take it's on basis of merit or desert or on the basis of their need, it's not complete. So there is no criteria of equality as such. So criteria of necessity indicates that towards the fundamental ideas of human equality, but sacrifices merit and capability. So if we consider equality to be the criteria among the humans to be distributed on the basis of these three that we talked about, then definitely the other criteria are going to suffer. The merit suffers, the capability suffers. Similarly, the basis of merit, if it is taken to differentiate among various people in society, in such a society there will be no place for incapables in that case. So the true criteria of justice lies in the coordination of these three bases. Now that brings us to understand procedural justice and substantial justice. If it is distributive justice and distributive justice is to be done on the basis of desert or on the basis of merit, on the basis of need, then what is that procedural justice and what is substantive justice? We need to understand justice in its proper perspective. So the question of who should get what and why will always be an important one, and political theorists they divide their answers to these questions into two broad categories, that is procedural and social or substantive. So in procedural justice especially, the demands of justice are satisfied if certain rules are followed. So the outcome of these procedures are not relevant to the evaluation of justice. So justice is only a property of individual behavior and cannot be a feature of society. That is, individuals are understood as autonomous and rational beings who make their own independent choices and are therefore responsible for the consequences of their actions. So the basic point that needs to be highlighted about procedural justice theory is that such theories do not make a distinction between the production and distribution. This means that each individual is on his or her own and has entitlements that are individual in character and not dependent on any abstract principle of distribution that takes the whole society into account and then decides who should get what and why. Now, this implies that the state would have no authority to interfere in the matter of individual entitlements, that is, their achievements, what they have got through their labor and efforts. So, in fact, it would be terribly unjust if the state wants to do so, that is, interfering in the lives of individuals in society. So based on a strong current of individualism, now these theories do not accept that societies have any ends or purpose as far as their role in society is concerned. So this is indeed a very attractive idea, and it makes the individual very powerful, very autonomous and completely in control of his or her life, and also totally responsible for the success or failure that may encounter in course of their actions. But when we think closely about this idea, we might feel a bit uncomfortable, because it implies that, for example, that if farmers are committing suicide in one or the other part of the country, this theory considers it is solely their responsibility. And they were responsible for what they did, and they failed in that endeavor. So what they are doing, if you're committing suicide, they were allowed to do that, and that's correct. Now, this is something which goes against or flies against the very concept of human consideration. So the exponents of this procedural justice, they include Herbert Spencer, then libertarians, Hayek, then Milton Friedman, Robert Nozick, and besides John Rawls. He has also sought to accommodate this requirement of substantive justice or social justice in his well-drawn scheme of procedural justice. So the Nozick especially, he argues that individual property holdings are just if they are consequence of fair acquisition. So if you acquired certain properties fairly, or even it is transferred to them, that means there is no fraud or no forces has been used in acquisition of that property the way they have acquired. And if no unfair practices have been followed in the acquisition of that property, if under these circumstances, Some individuals are able to acquire or amass a huge amount of property without using force or fraud. Logic would not allow a redistribution of this property. So, procedural justice, according to him, is acquiring property in fair means, and there should not be state interference to check that acquiring of property or to tax or level taxes on those individuals in the benefit of larger society. Then, if we talk about substantive justice and try to understand what it means, so in theories of social justice, justice is seen as a feature of society. Now, here the evaluation is to be done in terms of not what an individual gets or does not get, but in terms of how just or unjust a society or state of affair is according to some agreed upon criterion. Now, such theories would be far more likely to advocate the use of the state to uphold the principle of justice. So, state's interference in social matter is something which this substantive justice allows. For example, a society might consider it just to allow only a certain section of people to have access to education, for example. And anyone who is trying to get access would incur the wrath of the authorities. So, the champions of substantive justice argue that the allocation or distribution of social advantage among various sections of society itself should be just, that is, it is the primary issue, and the procedure for making such allocation, that is secondary, because it can be judged suitably to meet the requirements of that just distribution. So, the idea of substantive justice corresponds to the philosophy of socialism. It holds that the test of justice in society is ascertaining whether the poor or underprivileged have adequate opportunity to improve their condition and their lot. So, it demands that the opportunities of self-development should be progressively extended to the underprivileged and disadvantaged section of society based on some fundamental assumptions that systematic departure from this equality, the concept of equality where equal opportunities to be provided to all in pursuit of justice is something which is allowed. So, these departures from this concept of justice where equal opportunities to be provided is only to be done in the interest of the underprivileged and deprived classes. So, if such discriminations are made, then it is something which is in the domain of the substantive justice. Then, if we move on to the various dimensions of the concept of justice, just to understand the concept in its proper perspective, the traditional concept of justice focused on just man, whereas the modern concept, it is considered, the modern concept of justice is different from its traditional concept. The traditional concept of justice focused on just man. It was primarily concerned with virtues befitting a man. It consisted in performance of his duties, which are attached to his status, which was determined by prevalent social and legal customs or mode of thought at the time. So, a typical example of traditional approach is a problem of justice is provided by Plato's theory of justice, which sought to prescribe the duties of different citizens and required them to develop virtues befitting those duties. And the modern concept of justice, on the contrary, is marked by a shift of this emphasis from the duty to distribution. So, in other words, the traditional view of justice embodied a conservative idea, the modern view embodies a progressive idea. So, the traditional view insisted on individual conforming to some preconceived image of society. The modern view of justice seeks to transform that society itself for the realization of certain human values. So, when the modern concept of justice is applied to the various aspects of social life, we get certain dimensions, that is legal, political, socio-economic notion of the justice. Although there is no watertight division of these dimensions, but still it constitutes a general scheme of social justice and need to be understood. So, legal justice, in terms of legal justice, it applies in two contexts, that is justice according to law, and here we do not question the validity of a law, but focus on the principle of administration of justice according to the prevalent law, and the law according to justice. Now, here we examine the substance of the law itself to ensure that it conforms to the requirements of justice. So, the notion of legal order implies that the decisions shall be made not arbitrarily, but in accordance with the general rules, and that these general rules, whatever they are, shall be correct That is, they may be called impartial when they are applied. So this is by criteria defining the class of cases coming under the rule. So justice in the legal sphere consists not only in an efficient administration of law, but it postulates that law itself should embody certain human values according to the prevailing social consciousness. Now, political justice, when we talk, it denotes a moral principle whose object was a general good and refers to the transformation of political institutions or political process, political rights, according to the current conception of justice. So this means, in the first place, the establishment of democratic institutions in the political life of the community, so that these institutions represent and take care of interest of the people, not of any privileged class. So political justice implies a full guarantee of liberty of thought and expression, especially the right to criticize the government and its policies, and then there should be a complete freedom for forming association, and the group of individuals or citizens, they may articulate their interest through the normal channels of communication. I mean, all those fundamental rights which makes an individual a right-bearing citizen are to be allowed in the concept of political justice. Then socio-economic concept, when we talk about socio-economic life of the community, cannot be transformed unless we combine the two together and try to understand the term in togetherness, that is how the social and how the economic aspect affect each other. So socio-economic justice, or we may term it as social justice, it's a broad term. It comprehends the reallocation of both material and moral advantage of the social life. It denotes a progressive concept of model of development, like Indian Constitution itself, particularly its preamble and the part dealing with the directive principles of state policy. It holds a promise of justice. So in common understanding, the social justice is usually applied to comprehend all the three aspects of justice in society, or that is the socio, economic and political. Of these, the economic aspect is most crucial, because economic disparities, especially they create injustice, and this injustice, it erodes the fundamental rights of the people. So if we see the relation between the justice, liberty and equality, we find that justice is the thread which runs through all these values and makes them part of an integrated whole. It recognizes their conflicts and contradicts and even in contradictions, and gives them a shape of universal principle of governance. So justice is the basic idea behind all three values, and we hold them in high esteem because they are manifestations of justice. So justice is the final goal to which all these three values should conform. So in our sense of justice, that impels us to postulate that human relations in society, they should be regulated by reason. It's our sense of justice which recognizes the dignity of the human being as such, and its individual as a rational being. So it demands that each individual should be treated as an end in itself, not as a mean. So in this respect, all individuals should be treated as equal to each other. So this justice brings into picture the equality of individuals. So no individual can be treated as superior or inferior because of any identities in the form of their birth, race or religion or language. So all individuals are potentially capable of acquiring excellence and making suitable contributions for the social good. So an adherence to the principle of equality becomes necessary in order to resolve the inherent contradictions of absolute liberty. So the principle of liberty will not conform to the principle of justice until the benefit of liberty is equally distributed among the individuals in society. So the idea of absolute liberty is in contradiction to these other terms of equality. So if justice or if liberty, for example, is defined as the absence of restraint, it cannot become a universal principle unless it is qualified by the principle of equality. So this postulates such restraints on liberty, that liberty or freedom of one does not become a threat to another's equality or liberty. So an unrestrained liberty of one or the chosen few will turn out to be a sentence of slavery for the rest of the community. So on the same principle, any restraint on liberty can only be upheld when it is truly proved that it is imposed in the interest of the justice and equality. So the principle of equality again is not the final principle of justice. Equality may be defined as an absence of discrimination. So in legal or political sphere, this interpretation of equality will not present much difficulty, but when it comes to the economic sphere, absence of discrimination may not meet the requirement of justice. So when society is divided into different stratas, so the private property and the conventional sources of prestige and power, one can enjoy special privileges and other being primarily the underprivileged classes. So the cost of justice, the cause of justice is not served finally. So the principle of justice requires that deprived and underprivileged sections should be given special protection in order to save them from the excesses of the dominant class. So finally, we can say that the principle of justice postulates not merely formal liberty and equality, but the transformation of those social conditions which obstruct the enjoyment of freedom and equality by ordinary men and women. So in conclusion, what we can find is that justice requires that a provision should be made for meeting some minimum needs of all human beings, irrespective of their individual contribution to society. So minimum needs contribute, or minimum need includes means of sustenance, health care, or some level of education or literacy, some good opportunities in the form of jobs, because jobs not only provide subsistence, but also it's a means of self-respect. So in an open society, there may be two criteria to allocate the allocation according to need, according to merit or their ability. But then if we try to enforce one, it creates a kind of a situation where others are deprived of those. If merit is one of the criteria, then on the basis of merit, then those who are not meritorious, they are the ones who are deprived of the sustenance of life. So in view of these constraints, the state should create adequate opportunities for or give suitable encouragement to the sublime art and profession in order to meet the requirement of justice, and the harmonization of interest of these possessed class and dispossessed class is what is important in coming to any final outcome as far as regard to justice is concerned. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation on justice, where we talked about justice, its meaning, its concept, and then we talked about its different criteria and its different dimensions to understand what it means. And finally, we also talked about the procedural part of justice and the substantive part of justice. So with that, I end. Thank you. Thank you for being with me. Thank you.